Welcome back to another episode of Uncovering Your Inner Power. I'm your host, Jill Ripley, and today we're talking about a topic that has the power to completely transform the way you experience your life. In today's episode, I would like to revisit a topic we covered back in episode 5 of the podcast, and that is about letting go of the victim mindset. Now, before anyone gets uncomfortable with that phrase, I want to make something very clear right from the start. A victim mindset is not the same thing as being the victim of something. There are people listening right now who have experienced abuse, betrayal, abandonment, neglect, loss, discrimination, addiction, illness, trauma, and heartbreak. Those experiences are very real. They matter. They leave wounds. Acknowledging that reality is not weakness, it's honesty. But there comes a point in the healing journey where we have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Am I carrying my pain, or is my pain carrying me? Because there is a difference. The goal of healing is not to pretend bad things never happened. The goal is to prevent those experiences from becoming the permanent lens through which we see ourselves, the world around us, and our future. Today, I want to explore how we can honor our wounds without becoming trapped inside them. Let's start by discussing one of the greatest misconceptions about healing, and that is that once we understand why we're hurting, we should automatically feel better. Unfortunately, that isn't usually how it works. Many people spend years analyzing their pain. They know exactly why they struggle with trust. They know exactly why they fear rejection. They know exactly where their people-pleasing tendencies came from. They understand the origin story, but understanding isn't the same thing as freedom. Insight is valuable, but insight alone doesn't create transformation. At some point, we have to stop asking, why am I this way? And start asking, what do I want to do about it now? Here's something I've noticed in both my own healing journey and in talking with other people. Sometimes the thing that keeps us stuck isn't what happened to us, it's the meaning we attach to it. We start out saying, I was abandoned, or I went through something traumatic. But somewhere along the way, you internalize it into, I'm unlovable or I'm broken. Do you hear the shift? One is describing an event, the other is describing an identity. And while painful experiences absolutely shape us, they don't have to define us. Healing often begins when we realize that what happened to us is not the same thing as who we are. Identities become the story we tell ourselves about who we are. And if we're not careful, we can spend years defending identities that were built during our darkest moments. I know this because I've walked that path myself. For a long time, I viewed much of my life through the lens of what happened to me. And honestly, that's understandable. When you've been hurt, it's natural to try to make sense of it all. But my healing didn't happen overnight. There wasn't a single moment where everything just suddenly became clear. Instead, healing happened one layer at a time through therapy, self-reflection, forgiveness, spiritual growth, and a willingness to keep showing up for myself. I slowly began to understand that my experiences were chapters in my story, not the entire story. And the more I learned to separate who I am from what happened to me, the more I began to reconnect with my own strength, resilience, and power. Here's something I've learned. The human mind loves certainty, even painful certainty. If someone spends years believing they're broken, that belief eventually becomes familiar. And what is familiar often feels safe. even when it's hurting us. That's why healing can feel so uncomfortable. You're not just changing behaviors, you're changing your identity. You're questioning stories that you've believed for decades. You're stepping away from a version of yourself you've known for a very long time. And that can feel terrifying. Sometimes people unconsciously hold on to victimhood because it protects them from disappointment. Think about it. If I believe nothing will ever work out for me, then I never have to risk trying. If I believe all relationships end badly, I never have to risk vulnerability. If I believe success is only for other people, I never have to risk failure. Victimhood can become a protective mechanism. It shields us from uncertainty, but it also shields us from possibility. One question I often encourage people to ask themselves is this: what am I getting from this story? Now, that question isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to create awareness. Maybe the story protects you from taking risks. Maybe it protects you from being disappointed. Maybe it gives you a sense of certainty. Maybe it allows you to avoid difficult decisions. Understanding the payoff of a limiting story is often the first step towards releasing it. Another thing I've noticed is that many people often mistake healing for waiting. They wait to feel confident before taking action. They wait to feel worthy before setting boundaries. They wait to feel fearless before pursuing their dreams. But healing doesn't happen before action. Healing often happens because of action. Confidence isn't something you find, it's something you build. One courageous choice at a time, one difficult conversation at a time, one boundary at a time, one act of self-respect at a time. Every time you choose yourself, you reinforce a new identity. You begin proving to yourself that you're stronger than you thought. Let's talk about responsibility for a moment, because this word can be triggering for people who have experienced trauma. When I talk about taking responsibility, I'm not talking about taking blame. Blame looks backwards. Responsibility looks forward. You are not responsible for what happened to you, but you are responsible for what happens next. That distinction changed my life because blame keeps us focused on the past. Responsibility invites us into the present. Blame asks, who caused this? Responsibility asks, what can I do now? And while we may not control everything that happens in our lives, we always have some influence over how we respond. That is where our power lives. Another trap people fall into is comparing their healing journey to someone else's. Maybe you've heard someone say, you should be over it by now. Or perhaps you've said that to yourself. Healing doesn't operate on a schedule. There's no finish line. There's no universal timeline. No gold star for getting there first. The question isn't how quickly you're healing. The question is whether you're moving in the direction of healing. Even tiny steps count. Sometimes healing looks dramatic. Sometimes healing looks like getting out of bed. Sometimes healing looks like drinking water, taking a walk, and deciding not to send that angry text. Growth isn't always glamorous, but it is powerful. I also want to talk about forgiveness because it's often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not saying what happened was okay. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is not pretending the wound never existed. Forgiveness is releasing your emotional attachment to the injury. It's deciding that the person who hurt you no longer gets to occupy space in your mind rent-free. It's choosing peace over perpetual resentment. And sometimes forgiveness happens in layers. You may think you've forgiven someone only to discover another layer of hurt underneath. That is normal. Healing is often less like flipping a switch and more like peeling an onion. There are layers, there are seasons, there are deeper levels of understanding. Be patient with yourself. Now, I'd like to give you a practical exercise. Take out a journal and write down a painful story you've been carrying. Maybe it's about a relationship, a childhood experience, a loss, a betrayal. Then answer these 3 questions. What happened? What meaning did I assign to what happened? What else could be true? For example, what happened? Someone abandoned me. What meaning did I assign? I'm not lovable. What else could be true? They lacked the emotional capacity to show up in a healthy way. Do you see how powerful that is? The event remains the same, but the interpretation changes. And often it's the interpretation that creates the greatest suffering. Another tool I want to offer is something I call evidence collecting. Our minds are constantly searching for evidence to support what we already believe, also known as confirmation bias. If you believe you're unworthy, your brain will gather proof. If you believe you're incapable, your brain will gather proof. If you believe you're resilient, your brain will also gather proof. Start collecting evidence for your strength. Write down moments when you were brave, moments when you persevered, moments when you showed kindness, moments when you got back up after life knocked you down. Your mind has spent years collecting evidence for your wounds. It's time to start collecting evidence for your power. I also want to address something that I think many women struggle with, and that's the tendency to make everyone else's needs more important than our own. Many of us were taught that being good meant being self-sacrificing, that being loving meant saying yes, that being kind meant putting ourselves last. But eventually, that pattern creates resentment, exhaustion, and disconnection from ourselves. Healing requires us to recognize that self-abandonment is not a virtue. You matter too. Your needs matter, your dreams matter, and learning to honor yourself isn't selfish. It's healthy. As we begin wrapping up today's conversation, I want to leave you with a perspective that has helped me tremendously. What if the goal isn't to erase your past? What if the goal is to integrate it? What if every challenge, every heartbreak, every disappointment, every obstacle has contributed to the wisdom you carry today? Not because suffering is required for growth, but because growth is possible through suffering. You don't have to love what happened. You don't have to be grateful for every painful experience, but perhaps you can acknowledge the strength that emerged because you survived it. Perhaps you can recognize the compassion you've developed, the resilience you've built, the wisdom you've earned, the courage you've cultivated. Those things matter. You are not the worst thing that happened to you. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your trauma, your mistakes, or your losses. You are the person who survived them. You are the person who is still here and keeps showing up. You are the person writing the next chapter. And the beautiful thing about that chapter is that it hasn't been written yet. You get a say in what comes next. So today, I invite you to ask yourself one simple question. If I fully believed in my own power, what would I do differently starting today? Then take one small step. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens one empowered choice at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who may need to hear it. And if you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to follow the show so you never miss an episode. And sign up for my newsletter if you'd like to stay up to date on what's coming up next. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, remember this. Your past may explain you, but it does not get to define you. Your wounds may have shaped you, but they don't own you. And your power has been within you all along. Keep uncovering it.